All right, welcome. This is what I guess you could call intro to looping. In this lesson, I'm going to touch on everything that is in this course that's going to require you to know how to loop it. So, with noise textures, how do we animate the noise texture and get that to loop? So we're going to be messing with the noise textures, any texture with a seed W value, which might not make sense now, but by the time you finish this course, it'll be your best friend. The wave texture, I'm going to show you how to make that seamlessly loop. Displacement, 360-degree rotations and how to add some variety there, but keep it looping. We're going to talk about randomness. In this case, we'll be using that for camera shake later on here in the course. And my favorite thing, a method that I've kind of been using forever, and I'm going to call it the box method. So we're going to start with the box method, and we're going to go into all of those things. But all of these things are just something you're going to need to know, and that there are aspects of these that I'm not going to repeat as we go on to the course because it'll just be arbitrary. But let's get into it. All right, so let's talk about the box method. This is something that I've used as kind of like a guarantee that large scenes will loop. So let's come up with something here. If I want to have a scene where I have a bunch of icospheres, for example, and then I'm going to go ahead and just place this icosphere around and go ahead and follow along in this part. So go ahead and create a bunch of icospheres and duplicate them around. And this is our scene, right? So I want to have an animation, right, where I'll be in the front. So imagine I have an animation where I'm going to hit the tilde key, and we're going to go to the front, and I'm going to add my camera, okay? So here he is. He's doing his thing, and I'll move him back over here, and I'll hit 0. So I want an animation where I'm flying through a whole bunch of these guys, but I want that animation to loop. And so, for example, this could be, instead of icospheres and a real world example of an animation you might want to loop, maybe these are hot air balloons and there's a field of grass and there's all this stuff, right? Which means the field of grass will have to make it look like it never ends. Never ending hot air balloons. How is that possible? Here is the method. I'm calling it the box method. So what I would do, what I like to do is get a visual guide of where my scene starts and stops. So in this case, the box is a plane. So I'm going to hit S10, S10. But the actual size doesn't matter. We'll get a plane again. I'll hit S8 in this one just to keep it that size. But the size of the actual container doesn't matter. You just need to know how big it is. So if we go over here to the transform settings, it's 8 by 8. Sometimes it'll be 5 by 5. Sometimes it'll be 10 by 10. But you do need to know, where does the scene start and stop. So I'll take some of these guys and move them here and just kind of distribute it. So again, imagine a whole scene. Maybe this is a castle, and there's all these different trees and stuff within this scene that you designed that you now want to run a camera through to make it look like it never ends. This is the box. This is all of our objects, and this guy right here is the box. So what I would do is I'm going to highlight everything except for the camera. We're going to hit M, which creates a collection. You'll click New Collection. So everything highlighted is now going to be in this new collection, and I'm going to call it Loop. So here it is. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Shift-A, Collection Instance, and I'm going to click on Loop, and now it spawned a new collection right here, this new loop. So what I'll do is I want it to be here, but see what I did? I just moved it with my mouse. We don't want to do that. What you want to do is hold down Control so it snaps. And the reason why we have this plane is to be a visual guide to know when I moved this instance, he is exactly where he needs to be, just touching there. And then I'm going to hit Alt-D. We're not going to hit Shift-D. Shift-D creates a duplication. Alt-D creates an instance, which is like a lighter, less data-heavy duplication. And then you can hold down Shift and then Alt-D again, holding down Control and bringing them to the very edge. This is how I know for a fact that my scene is going to loop. So, okay, well, how does this make any sense? So I know that this is 8 by 8, right? Because we hit S8. So my camera here needs to start at the very edge here. And from experience, I know this is going to be the -8. So if I type in -8, it is, because this square is 8 by 8, I know that he is exactly where he needs to be on the y, because we're going to animate it on the y-axis. This is the y direction here. So he's starting where he needs to start. And then let's say I'm going to bring my timeline up right over here. I'm going to give myself 80 frames. Okay? Now, here's where it says +8. Watch. If I type 8, you saw one of these disappear, but that's not, we can always just duplicate forever. That doesn't matter in terms of looping. But notice nothing really looked like it moved. But he went from this side to this side. Now watch it. See we're at -8. I'm going to type in 8. He moved. He went across that scene. So let's just go ahead and animate it. And one very, very important thing to do when using the box method things and really looping anything in Blender, don't start at frame 1. Because the problem is, if we start at frame 1 and animate to frame 80 and frame 1 will look precisely the same. So there'll be a duplicate frame, because, for a loop to work, it needs to be the beginning and the end have to look exactly the same. But in this case, that's not what I'm talking about. The actual specific frame will be exact. So we need to just go ahead and start at 0 to essentially alleviate that, start a frame early. And so here's our camera. He's at -8. We'll click this, and then we'll go to frame 80, and we'll type in +8. And we'll click it. Now, if I press play, don't mind this guy back here deleting. That's not a problem. But notice everything is looping. Everything looks great. It's awesome. And we can also, and so that is how to get a scene to loop. And you can infinitely, of course, duplicate this down the line, right? So we'll do it again. I'm holding down Control to duplicate. See how it snaps to view? That's all you need to know as your visual guide. So I'm just trying to make it look crazy. And then to hide the guide, you can just add in a mask modifier. Oh, he's gone. And so look at this. I'm going to make, you don't have to follow along here. I'll make my camera nice and wide. But notice we're flying through this scene of objects, and it's completely seamless now. And that is because I could guarantee their placement, the -8 to the +8. But the -8 and +8, it doesn't have to be just -8, just +8. We have that visual guide. So if I go back to the plane, if I can find it, and I'm going to go ahead and remove this, remove the mask modifier. It is easy. I want this animation to be faster. So I'll click on my camera. Again, we're going to start at the -8 because that is the correct, start spot. But notice we have these instances because the rule, here's the biggest rule for looping, and that's what this sort of technique represents. The number one rule to make anything look seamless, a seamless loop, is the very beginning and the very end of the animation have to be exactly the same, so that whenever you're in like a video editor and you have your 120 frame clip and then you just copy it like 3 times so it just keeps playing and playing, you won't be able to tell when when you stop the 120 frames and you start it again, you start it over. Because the beginning and the end looked precisely the same, unless you start to notice things and watch it for a while, it just looks like it goes on forever. And so say I want to make this like 1,000 frames long to make sure make sure people don't notice or whatever, just maybe it needs to be 1,000 frames. And so I'm going to take my camera, and of course, this is why we duplicated, made an exact duplicate so that the beginning and the end look precisely the same. And so we're at frame 0. I'm going to take my camera, and we have our visual guide of where these instances start and stop. So I'll take my camera, I'll click this, and then I'll go to frame 1000 and say, I want to stop the camera at this instance, but it's still going to loop because we're seeing the beginning of the animation. You can see a sea of objects. In the beginning of this animation, you could see a sea of objects. And as long as you can't see the very end where this ends, and you can do that through moving the camera, having an object in the way, fog, all of that stuff. And so I'm going to say, I want to stop my camera there. So I'm going to hold down Control. And looks like he's being weird. I'm going to hold down Control, and go to the end. And you can just pick whatever one. But remember, hold down Control and stop him at this line. And how do we know that this was the right, he stopped at the right spot? You can visually see it here. So -8, 8, 16, 24, 32, 48, 56, all that stuff, the math is right. But we can see 72 is within that 8 family, 8 times whatever it is. And there we go. And then I'm in my keyframe. And now it's over 1,000 frames. We're going to travel through and he'll go forever and ever and ever. And again, as long as you can't see that thing happen where it goes boop like that, as long as you're able to hide that, the box method will work forever. So again, if you have an animation where I'm going to build this scene where there's a big grass field and there's trees and all of this stuff, and I want to travel my camera through this little forest, build the forest within the bounds of whatever it can be 20 by 20. It can be 5 by 5. And then you take that, the scene is finished. You turn it into a collection and then you instance it and you run your camera through that, and that will be a seamless animation of say a POV of a bug flying through a forest. The sky's the limit here, but as long as you're within the bounds of that box and that camera starts and stops at the beginning of the scene and stops at the very exact end of one of those instances, perfect. That's the box method. Took a while to explain, but I wanted to make sure that you can really understand this. And if you still don't get it, and you're someone like me who all right, I'm fine with explanations, but I really want to do it in action, keep watching the course. We're going to constantly do the box method, and you will eventually go, oh, now I get it. If this didn't help, we'll do it through action. That's really why I structured the course this way. That's how I learn. That's how I wanted to teach. So we will learn through action if this didn't really make any sense. With that being said, I'm going to delete everything, and we're going to move on to looping the double. Well, I guess we'll do displacement next. Even though we don't do any modifier-based displacement in this course, there will be times where you probably want to use it. We're doing all our displacement and geometry nodes in the course, but I think this is important to know. So let's go ahead and get an icosphere. I'm gonna hit the period key just to center him out. And then let's subdivide him. Let's add a modifier, and we're gonna get a displacement. Oops. DISP displace. And let's pick any texture. I'm gonna click new. I'm gonna click on this button, and we're gonna add clouds. And let's make the depth down. And then I'll bring the size down as well. All right, here it is. This is our crazy guy. How do you animate the displacement of, well, how do you animate displacement at all? Because that can offer some really cool opportunities if there's textures on it, if we're playing with layer weights, whatever. How do we animate something being displaced? Well, the way that can work is if I just hit G and I move this guy around, the displacement isn't going to move. And that's because we have our coordinates here set to local. So this object's coordinates. But if we go, say, global coordinates and we move them around, now you can start to see something happen. And that's because essentially you're imagine this displacement texture existing in this entire world, and this object is flowing through that. But instead of global coordinates, we can use object coordinates. Now it will use the coordinates of a different object to move the displacement. And here's why that's interesting. We can get an empty, we'll go to plane axis, and I'll just hit G and I'll move him over here so you can see him. And then here we've clicked object coordinates, so we have to pick an object. So in this case, we use the empty. So now if I click on this empty and I hit R twice just to move it, it is now animating as I move this empty, which presents a very cool opportunity. I'm going to give myself 80 frames over here. And then I'm going to go back to frame 0, of course, for all loops. Start at frame 0. And we know that rotations loop if they go in 360 degree, which means we're starting here and we're stopping at 360 degrees. So if I click keyframe here on the Y and I go to the end and I type in 360, enter, and I click that, now it's animating. Now it's a little insane, so I think if we scale up, just scale up the empty, it'll look a little more reasonable, and then say, hey, I'll give myself 300 frames just so that this is like nice to watch, and I'll move my keyframe back over here. There we go. So here we go. We have our object displacing, but now our displacement is moving. It's going across 360 frames, and I scaled up the empty like this. The smaller scale, the faster it's going to go. But as you can see, if I go to the end of the timeline here, our displacement is looping. We're moving it around. And what's cool is we can add some more variation to this movement. We don't have to just do this one axis of 360 degree. We could also go, I'm gonna go back to frame 0 and say, hey, let's take this guy, and I'm gonna type in negative 360 and then click keyframe. Now it's gonna move and add more randomness to this guy. It starts to be really cool. And then let me show you something also. We can add things. The whole rule is, how can we get this empty to move around, but that movement be looping, right? So 360 degree rotations is the one. Actually, we'll just leave it here. You can also attach it to like a circle. So there's a way you can attach this empty to a circle and make it go around that circle while it's rotating on its own. And that's how you loop it. So the whole idea with displacement and using the object coordinate is whatever object is the coordinate, get that thing to move in a loop. In this case, I always just use 360 degree rotations in some way, shape, or form. In this case, just very simple 360 degree rotations, and you can scale up that object. And now he just goops and loops and roops around and does what he's going to do, and it looks awesome. It's like gum or whatever you want it to be. But in this case, you can take this and throw some other objects on it. Maybe you can even like say you can decimate it. Let's say it's shade flat so it looks cool. You can like decimate it, so now you have something weird like this, and you could take it and like do this kind of thing. So there's a lot of opportunities that being able to loop displacement and displacement moving offers, and that's how that's done. So I talked about 360 degree looping, so let's kind of stay on that topic really quickly. So I'm gonna hit Shift A, and you can go ahead and follow along, and let's get a torus. And I'm gonna take this guy and I'm gonna make him much wider and much skinnier. And then let's go ahead and Shift A and get 2 more toruses. So let's get another torus, but bring that radius in. And then we'll get 1 more torus and bring that radius in like this. So now we have this. I'm gonna give myself 80 frames. I'm gonna shade smooth these guys just for whatever. Imagine I have a client asked me to make an animation where there's some glowing rings rotating around. I'm like, cool, I can rotate some glowing rings. So I'm gonna take this guy. Actually, I'll take this guy. Very easy. We're gonna start at frame 0, of course, and then we'll go here, and then I'm just gonna click and drag on these 2. And then I can click and drag here and type in 360, enter, and then click and drag the keyframe. And now he's animating. Cool. And then say, oh, that's too much. That's too fast. I'll go 300 frames and drag my keyframe all the way to frame 300. Cool. Easy. All right. So now this one's animating, but I go, oh, well, all right, let's animate this one. Let's have him, I guess we'll make it go the opposite way. And so we'll say keyframe here, click and drag 360. Now they're both doing this. And then I can take this guy, and then we'll say, take this one, negative 360. And I promise there is a point to this. Now all these guys are rotating. And they're rotating differently. They're combining 2 axes each to get an interesting loop, an interesting rotation. The only thing is, I kind of want I want there to be different speeds, but I still want it to loop. So what you can do is say, I want him to be the quickest. So I'm gonna say, I want to rotate maybe 4 times instead of once over the span of the 300 frames. Well, I'm going to say negative 360, and then you can say asterisk, which is 360 times. I want to rotate 5 times, asterisk 5. Okay, 1800, and so I'll say negative 1800, and then we'll hit I. And now he's looping 5 times while these guys loop once. And so on this guy, I say, okay, well, I'm going to click and drag, and I'm going to type in 360 asterisk 3, 360 times 3, which is 1080. I'm going to hit I. And now you have a looping animation of whatever you have. This could be like a, if you're making watches, like a tourbillon, or that was very specific. If you're making like a space station where there's this big thing in the middle where you can now play with different speeds of what's going on in that contraption, but the animation is still going to loop seamlessly because you're just making it rotate more options. Now, it might seem obvious to you, but to some, oh, okay, this unlocks some really cool ideas of adding some variety and some variation to my animations, and it's really cool. And it's a very simple way. And when you're in the complexity of whatever animations you're going to be making in the future, this is going to be something that is going to help you quite a bit with coming up with some variety in movements. Because when you are constrained to needing something to loop seamlessly, you're going to need as many tools in your back pocket as possible. And this is a really useful one. All right, we're here. We're going to delete them. Let's do one more, and then we're going to get into some shader node and geometry nodes looping, which is going to be really exciting. So I'm going to take this cube here, and I'm going to give myself 120 frames this time. Go back to frame 0, and I'm just going to have him rotate by 360 over 120 frames. So he's just going to rotate once. Cool. Now let's head over. We're going to use the, actually no, we're just going to make a new window here. And we're going to open up a window called the graph editor. And this is where you can take your keyframes and give them something, some oomph or some edits or whatever. And that's going to be here in the graph editor. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert a really cool modifier. So we'll click modifiers here, and then we're going to go here to noise. And then I'm going to hover over here, and I'm going to hit home so we can see the whole keyframe. Look at that. We're adding a little bit of noise. So say let's bring our scale to 10 maybe. And we added some randomness. And so this modifier will help us add randomness to very simple movements. But notice something. Once we get to the end, see that? It kind of glitches. We'll bring that strength down a little bit. Watch when we get to the end of it's not seamless. How can we make this seamless? Because I still want there to be like a little bit of randomness. You're animating like a hand or like a spaceship instead of like moving and be like a little bit like it's a rocky animation. How do we take this randomness and what I'm going to say contain it so that it loops seamlessly, but we still get to have the joy of adding randomness? And this is how you create camera shake. The way you're going to do that is with this thing called restrict frame range. So I'm going to click restrict frame range, and now it's going to take everything away because we have to tell it where to start the restriction, where to stop the restriction. So we're going to say start at frame 1. We have 120 frames, so end it at 120. Everything's back. And so again, it's not going to be seamless. And so we have this thing called blend in. And so if I bring my blend in, now it is going to, instead of immediately start with the noise, it's actually going to give it a little second to transition into that. And so I'm going to give myself, I found 30 to be a really good blend in scale. And so we'll give out, and you can watch it here, 30. So now if I go to the end of my timeline, there we go. Now we get to enjoy a simple movement that has this really cool randomness to it, but we're still going to be allowed to loop. And that is how that's done in the graph editor. So we are going to be doing this a little bit later, but it's good to know it and apply this to so many different things. Now, let's head into the crazy stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this window, and let's loop some textures. So we're just going to get a plane, and we're going to leave it here. And let's go ahead and create a really quick material to show how things are looping. So we're going to click here and go to the shader editor. I'm going to hit N. We're going to get a new material by clicking new. And I'm going to go to the material preview button. And here is, let's make it metallic just for fun. Maybe make it kind of shiny, slightly shiny. Now we have this metal material. And then let's go ahead and get our color ramp. And this guy is very important, and we will talk about him later in the shading lessons. This is less to teach you about how shading works or how materials work, and really just to get your feet warm for some things that we're going to be doing quite a lot later in this course. So let's plug the color ramp into the base color, and let's get the wonderful noise texture. And we'll plug him into the color ramp. This is all we're going to need for now. I'll take this color ramp and just kind of crunch it in a little bit like this so we can see the texture more obviously. So here we go. This is a noise pattern, and you can play with the scale, you can play with the detail and the roughness. I'm going to go back to default. I'm going to hit Control Z, and this is what I want to teach you how to loop, which is the 4D. The 4D allows this new little node this new little slider to show up called the W, which is like a seed value, but in this case it animates in a cool way, or it allows you to kind of animate a really interesting sort of provides context for the seed value. And so this is a really cool movement, and there's actually a lot in this course that we are going to utilize this animating W value. And so if we go ahead and get like the Voronoi, you don't have to follow along for this. The Voronoi also has a 4D function. There's a couple nodes here that have a 4D function, and they all do the same thing, create a randomness, but they animate. And being able to take the W and loop that is going to be extremely valuable. As we go through this course, there's going to be so many things that the noise textures or textures in general control in Blender, and being able to loop the movements that they allow you to do is extremely useful. So how do we loop this very seemingly random thing? It's going to be weird. It's not really going to make sense, but it works. So what you'll do is you'll take your noise texture or any texture with the W and bring your W to 0. Then I'm going to hit Shift D, and then I'm going to hit Shift A and get a mix color. And I know I'm not going to explain what all these nodes do. That's going to be later on. I'm just talking about this process for you to be like, oh, I remember that. Really just to get you warm on these topics. So now we have both of them plugged in to the mix, but because they're exactly the same, transitioning from one to the other is not going to show anything. But that's what we want. So I'm going to go back to frame 0. And first we're going to take the W, and he is going to start, of course, we want to start at a value of 0. I'm going to hover over here and hit I, and then write this guy here. I'm going to hit I on the factor. We're going to go to the end, and I'm going to type in 3. Actually, no, we're going to type in 1, I. And then we're going to slide this guy over, and I'm going to hit I. Now that we're at frame 120, we can go focus on this guy. He is going to start here at 0. He's going to go back to the beginning, and we're going to say -1 because he's +1. And so watch what happens. First off, we can see, all right, it does loop. If we go to the end, it seems loop, but why does it loop? So notice what's happening here. Both of these values are traveling in a positive direction. This one is starting at -1 and ending at 0. So he's traveling, essentially imagine this direction. He's traveling to a more positive number. And this guy is just going further positive. So he's already in the positive by at 0, and he's all the way +1. And so, and this node here says, all right, we're going to reveal this one. And as the factor goes over, we're going to reveal this one. So by the end of the animation, we are arriving at a value of 0. We're starting at a value of 0, and we're ending at a value of 0. So we're starting viewing him, we are ending viewing him, and then the animation restarts at 0. That's why this works. Now, if the technical answer didn't make sense, it doesn't matter as long as you know and remember this process. And we're going to do it so many times in this course, you'll eventually have it memorized. But that is how looping the W works in this instance. But there we go. That is that. All right. The next node that we need to know how to loop is the wave texture right here, this guy. So we'll plug him in. And the thing we're going to learn how to move is the offset, because this is cool, and we can distort it and it still moves. Or We can go to rings and make it spherical. And this moves, right? But it's all moving by this phase offset slider. So we'll just bring the node back to default and bring phase offset to 0. Now this is one of the few ones that I don't really know why this makes it loop. I just know that it does. And here it is. We want this movement. So I'm going to go ahead and just distort it and then bring my scale up. And we have this offset that's going to animate. So I'm going to go ahead, start at frame 0. I'm going to hit I. I'm going to go to 120, and I'm going to type in an even number. So it needs to be an even number. In this case, we'll do 4 times, or asterisk, pi. And then we'll hit I. And if we go to the end here, it's a seamless loop. I don't know why pi makes it loop. I'm not great with math, and as we go through the course, I'll be mentioning several times, I'm a visual learner, which is why looping the W made sense to me, because I can see those numbers going to 0. I just know that if you do a positive number times pi and animate that, the phase offset of the wave texture will loop. This is such an easy way to get a texture moving and looping. And then now you can take this guy and do literally whatever you want to do with it. Now you have these little strings that are moving through, and look at this. This is already like an animating background for a website. Concert visuals, whatever you want, or controlling geometry. Textures control geometry. So in this course, we're going to be using geometry nodes quite a bit, and textures are going to be manipulating that geometry. So knowing how to take textures and loop the manipulation of geometry is very useful, and that is very, very good to know. I think that's everything. That is everything. We loop the W, we loop the W, we loop the wave texture, we loop the displacement, the box loop, 360. All of this stuff is now information that you know. Again, this particular lesson wasn't to get you to really understand everything or really memorize everything. This course is very much a type of course that you can watch in an order that you'd like to once you watch the whole thing in order. So like, hey, I forgot how to do something. Let me resort back to this video and relearn it really quick. That's why this lesson is here. But currently, if this is your first time watching the course, it's meant to get your feet warm so that you can go in later and kind of be like, oh, okay, I remember him mentioning that. It'll start to burn that into your brain, because that's how I remember things. So with that being said, that's the end of Intro to Looping. It was a lot. Looks like we're at 37 minutes on this record. But with that being said, onward to the next lesson.